My name is Edgar Xochitl, and we are at Hummingbird Farm. It's a collective farm in the Excelsior in San Francisco, and the name of our collective is Urban Campesinex. We're a part of Poder. Poder is the pueblo organizing the development of economic and environmental rights. The farm is in the Excelsior. It's one of the I guess you could say the last neighborhoods in San Francisco that haven't been gentrified completely. There's a lot of people of color that live here, Filipino, Filipinx, some Chinese speakers, and some raza that's been here. The Excelsior sits south of the Mission and north of Daly City. It has some of the lowest farmers markets and green spaces. Well, it actually does have this space. It's a wilderness area, and then we also have some soccer fields. So it's in this little crevice, and it's been organized by the Urban Campesinex, which again I mentioned was a collective of gender nonconforming campesinos or campesinas. Actually, the deliberate reason why we use the X is to remove ourselves from that gender binary that we find in Spanish. So in Romance languages, O and A tend to assign gender to people, and so by using the X, we're stepping away from that and including all peoples regardless of their gender identity and preference, because we are all earth workers. So and in earth workers, we're also earth healers, and we're healing ourselves and the earth at the same time. So this space specifically, there's no sense of land ownership between the people who work the farm. We're just kind of working it together, and it's also in the park. Like I mentioned, it's got a very hike wilderness side, so there's a lot of wildlife coming in, and then there's also a very urban, like high recreational urban sports section. There's a skate park at the top of the farm too, and there's no fence, so people can come and go, which can be both a great way to build community, and it can also lead to a lot of just social chaos that happens in urban settings. It's our first production, so we kind of started in November of 2017. This farm is on Ohlone territory, and that is super important to acknowledge, because as we move with environmental justice, we can't have that justice if we don't acknowledge the land that we occupy. That we share, that we honor, that we respect, and that we live on. That is super important to acknowledge, because it's their stories, it's their ceremonies that have already blessed the land. It's their relationship that we are just tapping into. These spaces are not just for us, but like I mentioned earlier, for the visible and the invisible. Who is here when we're not here, right? What are the spirits? Call it what it is, but there's going to be chaos and magic that happens when we're not here, and that sometimes could be something from the spiritual world, or sometimes it could be someone in the community. I can feel the energy of when ceremony happens and how like the wildlife kind of responds in ways. So I definitely know that whatever we're putting into this space is coming back. In the collective, we're not just using the space for food. We're using the space for medicine, spirituality, organizing, reconnecting to the land. And so there's a lot of ceremonies that can be done without growing food. And so especially in an urban space where, like I mentioned, we're in the Excelsior, there's a lot of apartment complexes here. Access to green space isn't always a thing. So we've had a few people who just gave birth, and we've already had one placenta here. But that's something that isn't really accessible to people. Having a place to honor their own spiritual ways and returning those things in a spiritual manner back to the earth. We also, just this last weekend, we had a queer two-spirit ceremony here, where we acknowledge our queer and transcestors who have been influential in our survival, but also just the queerness that exists in nature. So it was a reaffirmation that the solutions for survival in climate chaos is queerness. Some of those solutions are out of this work. Some of the ways we're organizing here on the farm is with queer ecology. It's a tool to really help us deconstruct the way that ecological sciences have been structured, and how to organize around that by reaffirming our own naturalness, our own connection to nature. Ecological science, in an academic sense, has been created and structured by white, hetero, cisgendered males who had access to plants and who had access to wealth to maintain plants outside of their native ecosystems. So there was a lot of biopiracy from the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And in moving all this plant material to Europe, eventually, there was a need to classify everything and put it into a structure. So Carl Linnaeus, who's credited with creating botany, did a lot of this work. And so a lot of these plants, specifically that came from other parts of the world, are forever labeled by European names in a scientific method. And so that's one way that colonialism has influenced our botany and what we know of ecological science now. But the other one and this is where queer ecology comes in, it's also influenced what we think of natural and unnatural in regards to homo and heterosexuality. In the way we label, botany labels flowers. We have male flowers and female flowers. Gender is a social construct, so these flowers are not considered as male or female, nor do they behave like that. So as we educate our next generation of youth that work in this space, we're encouraging language like pollen producer and fruit producing to give both of them reproductive power without influencing this idea of gender into the flowers. There's also a spiritual element to it. So how do we, as two-spirit people, reconnect with queer ecology to really educate those around us, right? And it was queer people of color, the two-spirited people in indigenous communities who stood up to the forces of colonialism. They were the biggest threat to them. Their existence was so radically different than what these colonizing mentality of what normal is, and then how it was rejustified through academic literature. They were the original resistors. They threatened white supremacy and colonialism from the start, because they were so different and so in tune to the way things were. The power, the magic, now that we could call queer magic, that they had a lot of it. And so that legacy still lives on, and it still lives on in the way we connect to the earth, the way we organize ourselves, and it gets stronger when we're around other people who have it, can teach us. And sometimes this is easy as just positive reinforcement in our ecological being, ourselves. Colonialism, as people of color, has taught us to question our own environmental knowledge, our own ecological knowledge, to doubt our traditional foodways. So although we're using the word queer ecology, and again, it's using English to describe something, this is where urban campesinex comes to, because we're still bringing a cultural layer to it, to our struggle, to our fight for climate justice, for our fight for environmental justice. Queer ecology is just taking some of those principles and applying them to ecological principles, because ecology is also a social construct. It's been created by humans to try to explain the natural world, but it's a perspective of this elite class that continues to try to maintain that power. We're working on deconstructing heteropatriarchy in our ecological systems, and that also includes working with each other and working in this space, in this rhythm of ceremony, and just being in tune with each other in a productive way, so we can grow food together and with the needs of the space. As we move through climate chaos, we need to have access to spaces like this, where we can come together and dream of the solutions and act upon those dreams. We're creating habitat for the visible and the invisible, things that we get to physically see, but also all the things we don't get to see, right? All the pollinators that come and go that we never get to know who they are. All the microbes in the soil, we don't get to see them, but we know they exist. And I think that's very similar to the spiritual element to how this space has been organized, and with the community and the love and the ceremonies that happen here. We look at plants again, their survival mechanisms are very queer. It's magic, right? They're catching carbon, they're photosynthesizing, they're doing something so simple yet so powerful. Photosynthesis is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's allowed our planet to go from this like ball of space dust and just chemistry into a biological ecosystem. Photosynthesis is magic because it allows an organism to go from heterotrophic to autotrophic. And for a plant specifically, that change in between that two life ways of consuming energy is super powerful because it's when the seed goes from heterotrophic as it consumes itself to put out the cotyledons. Those cotyledons need to reach the sun to become autotrophic and then start producing its own food from the sun. That, I think, for me, that exchange of going from consuming to an auto-producing organism is the queerness, is the magic right there. It's what they inherited from their ancestors. And those are the fossil fuels. Those are fossil fuels. Their ancestors are fossil fuels. Just as we should leave the remains of our indigenous elders and ancestors, their physical bodies in the ground, we should also do that with the remains of the plants that gave us fossil fuels. Those are our plant ancestors, and they should stay in the ground. We need to work with the current plants because we're right in the middle of all of this. The plants we can build a relationship with now have inherited all this resistance and resilience from their ancestors. But as we look into the future, the next 7 generations, 8 generations, 20 generations, we are going to continue to co-evolve with our plants. Just like we got from Teosintla to maize here in about 3,000 years, right? We have another 3,000 years. If we're going to live that long, we're going to continue to co-evolve with these plants. Especially now as we deal with climate change and the excess carbon in the atmosphere, we're much more dependent on figuring out how to use that magic of photosynthesis to capture as much of that carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into biomass. That's one of the things we're educating around in this space, is not just queer ecology, but also carbon sequestration, and how what we're doing is part of the solution. We're feeding our community, we are catching carbon, and organizing around that idea that carbon sequestration is the solution. And that's local. That's how we can get the community involved in doing something. So we just cleared this patch of weeds, and we in that discussion of them being weeds, that's also part of this kind of deconstruction of the ecology, and how that resilience of these weeds existing is similar to us as queer people of color who get called the weeds of society, or delinquents, or who are really just taking the brunt of white supremacy in our nation. But it's really our resilience that's led us here into, just like the what we call weeds. They're actually doing more than most people at catching carbon, right? They're doing something about climate change. They're existing, and they're resisting photosynthesis and that need to live, to thrive, to survive. All organisms have that, and weeds, invasive species, all of that. The plants have been on Earth, and they're just adapting to local conditions. It's humans, and especially us as socially constructed humans, who we organize and move things around, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident, but they're using what they need to survive. And it's silly for us to think that hetero ways of thinking will apply to plants and the solutions that plants have. Plants are so much older than us. They're millions of years older than us. And it's their biochemistry and their relationship with the insects that made the planet what it was for mammals to even show up. yet alone humans. And so for us to try to label them with this binary system just sounds really silly. Um, and that's what queer ecologies is just a tool to really just look at bigger ways of thinking and seeing how it's all connected. Colonialism has impacted the ecology, and queer ecology is a way to resist, to look back, mixed with this two-spirit farmer identity that which I have. This is the way I'm definitely approaching all this: two-spirit farming, queer Chicano, Chicanx. I'm only holding a tiny piece of the puzzle that was held by my ancestors, and I'm just trying to pass that information down. I definitely see queer as just like I mentioned, a verb. I like taking it from a noun to a verb, because rather than just focusing on myself as a queer person, it's focusing on the actions that I can help create. Queer is a social construct. It's been created to kind of help create an alternative to heteronormativity. I grew up in a family of farm workers, campesinos in Mexico. My family's from Puebla, Mexico, and they've been growing food for generations. My parents migrated here. Actually, I was born right at the border. My mom was crossing the border when her water broke, and then the coyotes dropped us off at UC San Diego Medical Center. So I was born in San Diego by hours. But that really just changed my life because it gave me so much privilege. It gave me this documentation, citizenship, and so my life has been easier because of it. But my lineage comes from farmers on both sides. So I've always had a relationship with plants. I've always enjoyed growing plants and experimenting with plants and just interacting with them. So I got my backgrounds I got an undergrad in restoration ecology, and then I did agroecology program in UC Santa Cruz. But through all that, I've always been dealing with, I am a queer person of color, and it's taken me time to grow into my own skin. And so queer ecology to me is what I needed, and it's the tool I needed to help me shape my own narrative, and shape it in a way that is aligned with the ecological practices that I work with. And so I am just one organism. My sexuality is a strength that I have. I've lived too much of my own life pretending that who I was someone that I wasn't. That's pretty much my first 18 years of life, right? Where I felt comfortable. Actually, I would say even to my early 20s, that although I was accepting myself at the time, I still wasn't completely comfortable in my own skin. I was first I had to unwrap layers of internalized racism I had myself. Then I had to do the homophobia, and then all the other sets of intersectionality of who I am. Yeah, queer ecology has been this avenue for me to feel better about my own self, and give me an active way to physically doing something to make the world a better space. And so I'm also helping build the community, the soil community and the social community here in Excelsior. Xochitl means flower in Nahuatl, and it's also traditionally used for women. It's a name that found me, and when I was studying at UC Santa Cruz, I was working on this idea of decolonizing flowers. I organized our plant sale around that idea, and again, it was coming from uncovering these layers of colonial botany and actually trying to organize with something. So I've been working on this idea of flower bending. It incorporates this queer ecology and some Mexica ideologies. In Mexica ideology, we all represent a flower, and when we are born, essentially when we got picked, so we eventually will go back to the earth. Our life force is like a flower that's been cut, and with that, we only have a certain amount of time on earth. The symbolism behind that is that there's intense beauty and it's sacred and it's precious, and we only have a certain amount of time. To really look at us bending time with our plants. So flower bending is taking some of these principles of queer ecology and applying them to how we interact with the world and how we use flowers as forms of resistance and queer visibility. It is a positive reaffirmation in our own queer identities. It's understanding that we are natural and we belong to the earth. Heteropatriarchy has made us feel that we are not natural, and science has only validated that. So religion, it has its own legacy of homophobia. Science is the rationale to religion, but then it is also laced with heteropatriarchy. And so queer ecology is challenging that, and this idea of flower bending is using flowers to affirm our naturalness, to understand that we are natural, and as we move through climate change, the solutions in those lie with us too, and the queerness that nature already shows us. We just got to listen. We don't need to talk to plants, we need to listen to them. The way flowers get pollinated, that in itself is also queer. There's at least 3 agents involved. At least there could be hundreds of agents, and if that isn't queer, then I mean that is super queer. It's like so many organisms can get involved with that, and that's totally not working with heteropatriarchy ways of reproduction. How we relate and which flowers we choose to nurture is how we will adapt to climate change. So it is both our soul flowers, who we are as people and spiritual beings, but also how we physically interact with the flowers and build those relationships to evolve, to co-evolve. This is epazote. It's a medicinal plant from Mesoamerica, also known as wormwood, and it's added to beans to help with flatulence, but also with intestines. These are young and they'll get bigger. This is the Edgar Xochitl. It's predominantly known by its colonized name, the dahlia, but it's the official flower of San Francisco, as well as the official flower of Mexico, the national flower of Mexico. And what's interesting with that is that it's known as the national flower of Mexico under its colonized name. So part of what our connection here, and going back to our traditional foodways and food names, is reconnecting with that, with those plant friends, relatives. These are being grown for flowers and food. The tubers are also edible. This is part of our educational concept. There's a lot of other flowers in the garden that are also reflect some of that idea. The zinnia, for example, is another one that came from Mesoamerica, Malin Xochitl. And then there's marigolds, which we were just weeding earlier, or cempasúchil. And that one is one of the plants that never really lost its indigenous name. And the reason why that is because the spiritual connection to that flower with the people was so strong. It's a flower we honor our dead with, and that connection between our living and our dead is, I would attribute to the reason why colonialism has never been able to replace its name. This is what the flower kind of looks like. These will be taller and these will be they'll be a different variety, but this is the flower of the dead. It's in our creation story. So cempasúchil, again, Xochitl is flower, and cempa means 20. So it's a prefix for 20. So before colonialism, the Mexica, Dia de los Muertos, was 2 cycles of 20. So the big celebration of death and the small, intimate celebration of death. And what that signified was basically 40 days of honoring our dead, which now gets confined to 2 days, the 1st and 2nd of November. So although colonialism and organized religion has shrunk that down, the significance of the flower hasn't left us. We are here because our ancestors survived, and we are here because our ancestors fought back, and they hid, and they figured out a way to evade and survive so that we could live here today. But we should definitely honor those that died. A lot of people died in genocide, Um, a lot of people died in sickness, had sadness, had depression. A lot of people died fighting back. Um, and so death is a unifying element, and it's not something that we necessarily fear, but we respect it. And we honor those that died because we are their living legacy, and we are the ancestors in the making. These flowers, we're also collecting seeds from there, and we are keeping these seeds and the story alive for this specific flower, because it is something that we're organizing with, but it's also just something that is super valuable, is how we honor our dead. And especially in this world where there's so much injustice and we continuously get shot at, we continuously get murdered, our life tends to be devalued because we're queer, because we're trans, because we're two-spirited, because we're people of color, we're poor. It's even much more important to honor the living, but organize for those that have died. We've used the Senpai Xochitl to honor people who have died queer people who have died at detention centers. So we've organized around that. Some of these seeds also came from the Black Lives Matter garden up at UC Santa Cruz, and it was used to honor black people who have died at the hands of police brutality. So these seeds, the previous generations of these seeds do have some of those layers of history. When we're growing, the Senpai Xochitl is not so much for a specific group of people, but it's for the people that we know in our lives that we are honoring. And so we can choose to honor any spectrum of death. I know there was someone, Nia Wilson, who was murdered on BART. And I know, to me, that certainly impacted me. And so when I was sowing these seeds, I sowed some of those seeds knowing that some of those flowers are going to go to her. It's for me to honor her, because for me, it shook my spirit in a way, because I am also a user of the BART system. And so just to have some white transient man just come and kill someone randomly, that could have been me. That could have easily been me. Because the plants are not specific to where we fall in the spectrum either. Plants are plants, right? And I think that's the point of queer ecology, is to deconstruct this like specific need to describe a role. And so within the ceremony, it's just queer people up front leading it, so that and then talking about that and creating the space for other people who may have been in a similar space, but it's something new. Amaranth is another one of our Spanish settlers came in. They tried to prevent the indigenous people from growing it because it was so spiritually attached to the people. And so that's one of those plants that adds great color to the space, but also is part of that resilience of our people and the plants. Definitely would call this environmental ecological justice. We're giving space for people in the community to have access to their food. We're helping catch carbon in a culturally significant way. It's incorporating our traditional plants like these right here. The Senpai Xochitl, they're gonna get 4 feet tall. And then in this space, because it's the first year here, that first bed was April, second bed was May, this is June, this is July, that's August. In the center of the garden, we have ceremony, but really just working the ground is ceremony. But we've had a Mayan protection ceremony, different Mayan and Aztec Mexica ceremonies. Being outside gives you less structure, is much more spiritual. But the land itself, being able to physically touch the land is so healing for someone who lives in a confined space. We live in a city, we live in San Francisco. There's very few spaces where you can actually work the earth that people have access to. There are very limited community gardens in this neighborhood, and those that are up have gates and locks and don't allow people to actually interact with plants. We are navigating in a trust system, so we hope that people who occupy the space also respect it, and for the most part they do. Um, but it's also important to let people physically touch things, because if they don't get to do that, then that is part of where the healing happens. All the plants seem to be doing pretty well, despite the chaos that goes on. When ceremony is happening, there's usually a kind of a balance of energy that simultaneously happens throughout the day. Sometimes we'll have some sort of song or something that refers to a form of energy, and then something, hawks or a flock of birds or something, will just kind of coincide perfectly with what's being said.
And maybe also, like,
There you go. That, we haven't seen that bird. It's a cormorant. I think it's a cormorant. That's the first cormorant I've seen on this farm. So I don't know if that was just a coincidence. But I've seen a lot of other birds, but that's the first cormorant I've seen since I've been here. So I think that was one of those cues.